Good evening, and welcome to the Pacific Union Real Estate Economic Forecast 2019. On behalf of all my colleagues at Pacific Union, super proud to be here with this full house tonight. Wow, I think we have, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 people online domestically, and I'm not sure about the metrics on our simulcast in Mandarin for our Mandarin-speaking folk in China. But what a great evening, and thank you for joining us. In partnership tonight, we put this program on with both the Mark Company as well as John Burns Real Estate Consulting. And it's just an absolutely fantastic partnership. I was in New York last week attending the John Byrne conference on the day after election. That was interesting. And these are really smart guys. This is the real deal. So as the campaign went, we're with them. So if you've joined us on the live broadcast, please engage with us during the event with questions or whatever you want. You can do that either at #PacUnion, #RealEstateVision. We have a few special guests in the audience tonight that I want to introduce. There's a lot of special guests in the audience tonight, but there's a few people that I want to introduce. And first is our partners from the Mark Company, seated here in the first row, the president of the Mark Company, Alan Mark. The Executive Vice President, Kristen Heathwood. And then our other partners, Doug Shaw and Hans Treuenfels. And then, supposed to be in the audience, but I have not seen her as of yet, is the Chief Executive of Urban Pace by the name of Lynn Hackney. Lynn, are you here? She's on the way. Okay, good. So Lynn flew from Washington, D.C. today. She runs a business very, very similar to the Mark Company in Washington, D.C., and we've been collaborating back and forth for the last year, and so she's joining us tonight. The agenda. We're going to walk you through, between myself, John Burns, Selma Hepp, and Dean Worley, we're going to walk you through 40 minutes of pretty impactful information. We're going to begin with a Bay Area economic outlook. We're going to then talk a little bit about acceleration and deceleration. We're going to look out to 2019 and give you some predictions for what we believe the markets will do between now and 2019. We'll do some Q&A and we'll have some closing thoughts. So if something happens or there's something said during the presentation and you'd like to engage with a question, just be prepared, and we have microphones at the bottom of each aisle. So this is our third anniversary, our third year of doing this. And in November of 2019, when we closed the event, we said, if you are trying to time the market so you can retire at that top picture at Nikki Beach in St. Bart's, you had best hurry because the runway is getting short. Okay, and the runway in St. Bart's is very, very short. I think the top of the market ended up being in May or June of 2015. So I think we did a pretty good job there. Last November, we had this event, the eve of the Square IPO. And if you'll recall, Square raised money the previous December at a $6 billion market cap, was coming public at 4.2, and I think settled in February about $2.8 billion market cap. And what we shared with everybody is this frothy market cannot continue. Unicorns cannot fly forever, and we needed to return to normalization is what we called it. So we feel pretty comfortable that our guidance so far has been on point, and I hope that you'll keep that in mind as we give you guidance here today. A couple things that we need to sort of talk about to get you in the right frame of mind is the words acceleration, deceleration, and decline. When I share with people at a social event that the markets are softening and they're slowing down, people's minds, generally speaking, go immediately to 2008. And that's not what we're saying at all. But this is the Burns Housing Index year by year from 2000 to 2017. That is an example between 2011 and 2014 of an accelerating market. The next 3 years that we predicted last year was going to be a normalization or a decelerating market. That doesn't mean a declining market. It just means decelerating, rising appreciation rates. This was the declining market. It's still very fresh in all of our minds, but I don't think that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to give you the difference between accelerating and decelerating markets. So it's time to get to the program. Our partnership with the John Burns Company is fantastic. John Burns himself, the CEO, is just an amazing mind, has a great grasp of the market, and so I'd like to introduce him to give us the macroeconomics for the San Francisco Bay Area. John?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. He always picks the things we did right last year, not the other stuff, so thank you for that. So I'm going to give you a macro perspective, and then we're going to turn it over to Selma and Dean that'll drill down a little bit into the markets you care about the most. So first, macroeconomically, since the Korean War, we've had 10 economic expansions. This is our 10th. And the length of the expansion you can see there in the orange was 7.3 years in. Normally, economic expansions are 5.5 years long, so we're 2 years past normal. But this has been a slower chug coming out of a really nasty downturn, and we, and along with most other people, think we got at least another 3 years to go. So I just want to throw that out there. People say how much longer in the cycle, and we're going to talk about mortgage rates and everything else. But really, it's the economy that matters the most, and the economy is doing great. So when people say, well, give me a snapshot for the U.S. housing market, I call it the Goldilocks housing market. It's not too hot, and it's not too cold. If you look at the top 50 housing markets, 5 of them are considered hot. This was one of them a year ago, and as Mark said, it's decelerated a little bit. We've downgraded it to warm, but warm is good. I think homes are selling, prices are appreciating, that's fine. Seattle, Portland, Reno actually, which is probably due for a downgrade this month, Dallas and Nashville are the hot ones. The blue you can see there, the Midwest, the Northeast, and if you're tied to oil, Houston and Bakersfield, you're not doing so well. But overall, the country's doing fine. And then where are we in the cycle? So we think of the housing cycle as having 5 phases, with phase 2 being the normal expansion. And just about every market in the country is in the normal expansion mode. There's about 8 markets that I would say are exuberant and got a little overheated, and this would be one of them. So, but I mean a little bit overheated. So if we had a recession right now, I think the Bay Area would get hurt harder than most areas, but we're not having a recession right now. So this is a little bit more risky than most markets in the country, but it's doing fine. So I started a big demographics research project that I thought would take me a year. It took me 3. 9,000 hours of research. I just want to give a little plug. I'm going to present a little bit of it here, but if you're interested in the demographics and you're running a business like I am, this book we just published last month called Big Shifts Ahead is available, and there's a little card in the back that on the tables in the back that you can use that's got some data on it and also a code to pull a couple hundred slides off of our website if you're interested in these things. So here's why I started studying demographics. John, what about the boomers? John, what about the millennials? And I said, well, what do these people have in common? So this is Mark Zuckerberg and my daughter, okay? 10 years of work experience, a father, worth a little bit of money, and a high school junior. They're both millennials. So how can we have a discussion about millennials when them and their friends are in completely different stages of life? You can go here too. And other than the hair color, we're in different stages of lives too. You know, a 70-year-old retired grandfather who thought he was moving, I guess he's not. And then that would have been a nice commission though, huh, if you could sell him that. And then I still got to put my child through college. We're both boomers. So what we did, and we're trying to change the conversation here, boomers, millennials, that predicts when births took off and when they slowed down. But if you're really running a business and you guys are selling homes, you know those people are in very different life stages. So what we did is we broke the generations down by decade, and there's a big color code here. Those are all the years you were born on the bottom and the number of people on the y-axis. And we gave each group a nickname here, and I'll go through the numbers with you a little bit because they all shifted society a little bit, but that shifted what they're looking for in housing. So if you're born in the 1930s, you grew up in the Great Depression, World War II, you're a saver. I mean, you saved all your lives. Those people had down payments, very conservative. 1940s, and you can see the big baby boom right there in the middle of the green. They were the achievers. They completely changed the conversation to, I'm going to borrow a lot of money, I'm going to buy big houses, I'm going to have lots of stuff. If you're selling retirement homes to these people, you know the number one question is storage, right? Then you move on to the 1950s, which is the heart of the baby boomers, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and their high school classes. Really true innovators. These are true workaholics. They don't know what retirement is. They're all turning 65 over the next 10 years. 40 million of them, though. So 24 million people born in the 1940s, 40 million born in the 1950s, and you can see the numbers along the top there. There was a boom and a bust. I should mention the shaded piece along the top is foreign born. There was a boom and a bust And you could see the first orange bar there, that was 1960. That was the peak birth year. That also was the year birth control was approved, the pill. But then that got filled in by immigration. And you look at the huge percentages of foreign born, and I'm going to show you the Bay Area in a minute. But if you're selling homes to people who are 36 to 45 years old, born in the 1970s, 23% of them nationally were born in another country. That's a very different demographic. And that group changed the conversation to be more about balance, away from their parents, which were their achievers, which were about grow, gain money, get divorced again, keep working. And they said it was really around 2001, I've got a lot of data on this, that the world kind of shifted, led by these people, to success. It got more balance in life, and we're seeing some of that. Then the big numbers are you call them the millennials, but the 1980s group, we call them the sharers because they invented the sharing economy. They were the early millennials. They came out right when the recession hit with a lot of student debt, and they eliminated a lot of middlemen with the sharing economy. And then the late millennials, which are shown in the green there, we call them the connectors because they're the ones that are leading society to be all about connecting 24/7 and staying in touch with people on their cell phones. Those are bigger groups, 44 million each, and they're going to get even bigger depending on what happens to immigration policy, but usually immigrants come here in their 20s and 30s, so assuming immigration policy stays the same, those numbers are even going to get larger, which is really good news. But keep a look at the shape of this graph, because I'm going to show you the Bay Area in just a minute after I do this one thing. So one of the big issues, obviously, is the down payment. And if you were born in the 1930s, you have $8 trillion. The people alive today born in the 1930s have $8 trillion in net worth. Those achievers born in the 1940s have $17 trillion in net worth. And they're going to start passing some of this on. But if this is my daughter, it ain't going that far this young. But a lot of down payments we are seeing are coming from that group of savers. So I asked you to remember the snapshot of the Bay Area graphic. Of the US graphic. The Bay Area looks totally different. So same color codes here, but instead of 13% foreign born, we're 32% foreign born here. If you were born in the 1970s, half of the people born in the 1970s in the Bay Area were born in a different country. That is different cultures, that is different sales process, that is more likely to live multi-generationally. A lot of things are very different here, and we need to get on top of that. And then this one actually surprised me. You see the gray bar there on the right, the 1990s, the connectors, that's the young millennials. There's so much talk about how many tech workers there are in the city. We actually have a much lower percentage of young people in the Bay Area than we do nationally, and I really think that a lot of that has to do with the cost of living. So the trend that we're spotting is, and we came up with a name for this, we're calling it Surban, because the suburbs have looked at what's gone on in San Francisco and other great cities and said, that is really cool, I want some of that in my city. And we're seeing the suburbs start to revitalize the downtowns. They've been doing this for a while, and starting to authorize some housing. A lot of it's apartments, some of it's for sale. I brought one project that I'm familiar with just north of here that sold out a few years ago, I think about a year ago, in Larkspur, called Rose Lane by the New Home Company. Right between a redeveloped downtown Larkspur and Redwood High School, one of the best high schools you can get into, they did $600,000 age-restricted new homes targeted to that older demographic. They sold out of those almost immediately. Right next to that $2 million family-oriented homes, I think they were a little overpriced at the time. Plus, they didn't use resale agents, which was a problem. But I think we fixed that problem, and they sold out. But that's the type of development that we're starting to see. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Selma Hepp. Mark really stepped up and brought in a wonderful chief economist to help out Pacific Union and to help you guys. So Selma, why don't you come on out?
Thank you, John. Thank you. So I'm going to spend next 10 minutes drilling a little bit deeper in local housing markets of the Bay Area. What we have seen over the last year overall, or on average, is 7% appreciation year to date. So when we look at the first 10 months of last year versus first 10 months of this year, appreciation has averaged 7% for the entire area. However, the variance in this appreciation has varied so much, and it really depends on a market to market what has happened in each area. So in the next few slides, I'm going to drill to local cities, and last slide I'm going to focus on some zip codes, and we're going to take a look at how appreciation changed over the last in 2016 versus 2015. So unfortunately, I am starting with, but we can't ignore that there has been some areas where the price appreciation actually declined. What that means is that the homes that sold in the first 10 months of last year versus the first 10 months of this year sold at relatively lower price. Now that may be because buyers were not bidding over the asking price as much as they were last year, or it may be that the sellers were more aware of what they can realistically get for their homes, so they were pricing their homes a little bit lower. So these areas that I'm talking about are highlighted here in red, and the table on the right-hand side gives you the list of city names where we have seen price declines. So we're talking about more expensive areas. On the bottom of this table, where you can see median prices in 2016 versus 2015, on the bottom of the table, you can see the average price. One thing to note here is that these are markets that are more than median price. So they're higher priced markets of the Bay Area, with the median price being $1.7 million this year and a little bit higher at $1.76 million last year. Now, next set of markets is what we can say where appreciation has remained normal. As you can see, that's the majority of the Bay Area. Now, when we're saying normal, what we mean here is that appreciation rates ranged anywhere between 0 and 10%. And as I said, the majority of the Bay Area falls in this category, and the table on the right just gives you a few markets that have fallen in that category. Now, again, what you can see here on the bottom of the table is the average price over the two periods, and again that the average price is relatively lower than what we have seen in the markets that have declined. So these markets are more affordable than the markets where the price appreciation has declined. Next set of markets have done really well. So in these markets, we have continued to see double-digit appreciation. So the appreciation in these markets ranged anywhere between 10 and 20%. And you can see on the very right hand of the table how these appreciation rates varied. One thing to note about these markets is that, again, median price is the most affordable price. So the median price being $500,000 in 2016 and $447,000 in 2015 shows you these are really, really affordable markets, and may have been markets that we have previously overlooked because either the stock of the housing stock was dilapidated or were not necessarily the most attractive markets. But now, with affordability constraint that we are dealing with, these are really, really hot markets, and again, with rates of appreciation in double digits. Now, the last little set of markets here, I'm focusing on zip codes, and this is where we saw appreciation rates exceed 20%. So on the very right hand of the table, you can see appreciation rates anywhere between 20 and 40%. Now, no city in the Bay Area has appreciated above 20%, but some of the zip codes have seen really strong appreciation rates. Now, the average price in these areas does vary, so it's not necessarily just the affordable markets. If you look at, for example, East Oakland, where the median price in 2016 was $325,000, that's very much different than Larkspur, where the median price was $1.7 million. However, out of 13 markets that are listed here, or 13 zip codes that are listed here, the majority, or over half of them, are actually actually in lower price category, and they are in East Bay, right across the Bay Bridge. So we're looking at Central Berkeley, North Berkeley. We're looking at Oakland, Fruitville, East Oakland, and then Grant Park, Lake Merritt. So all of these areas that are in close proximity to transportation corridors and job center, being in San Francisco, Oakland, or to some degree Oakland. Okay, so now moving away from this a little bit normal set of markets, we're going to take a quick look at what happened to ultra luxury sales. When we're talking about luxury sales, this is the homes that are priced above $10 million. And what's interesting when we're looking at these markets is that we were worried about these markets in the same way we were worried about markets priced above $2 million and above coming into this year with all the jitters we've had in the market. But an interesting thing to note here, if you add up the numbers in the table on the right-hand side for 2015 versus 2016, there have been actually more sales in 2016. So we're added about 58 sales of homes priced above 10 million this year versus 51 sales that happened last year. And then in the map, you can see the cities in which those sales occurred. One interesting thing is that Alameda, and specifically Oakland, was one of the markets that appeared for the first time with a sale of $10 million home, $10 million and above home. And then another thing to note is that San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara all did see increase in this in sales of homes priced above 10 million. And then a short look at our favorite resort market, Tahoe market, where we have seen an incredibly strong market over the last year. The sales in Tahoe area increased 20% year to date, with the strongest increase actually in the last quarter. So what this chart shows you is monthly sales over the last 2 years, and the last quarter being the gray bars in the middle and the gray bars at the very far end, which compares the 2 years. And that's where the majority of the sales happened in Tahoe area. Now, when we pull it all together, going back to the Bay Area, we pull it all together and throw it all on one map, you can see a very, very colorful map here. And this shows you, if you look at the legend on the bottom, that wide range of appreciation that I was talking about. Now, changes in prices over the last year are in large part driven by two factors. One is affordability. So in areas that are most affordable, we have seen the highest price appreciation, where depreciation happened in areas that were least affordable. The second factor that contributed to price changes is accessibility to jobs and transit. Again, the areas with accessibility to jobs and transit have appreciated the most, whereas areas further out have actually depreciated. Now, a couple other things to note about the recent trends in the market. We can all agree on the fact that buyers have become more wary and more cautious coming into this year. And so this slide here shows you the share of listings that sold over the asking price, with orange representing 2015 and gray representing 2016. And what you can see here is the decrease in share of sales selling over the asking price this year versus last year, and with a special emphasis being on San Francisco, Santa Clara, and San Mateo, or the Silicon Valley, where in addition to being some of the most unaffordable markets of the Bay Area. And then, in addition to being more cautious, they were also not willing to make offers much higher than the asking price. So in this chart, you can see the premium paid over the asking price, again, by county and comparing 2015 to 2016. And then, again, focusing on San Francisco and the Silicon Valley, you can see the drop of 3 to 4 percentage points in the premium paid over the asking price. And then the last slide that I'm going to close with is the question, the big question of inventory. And it's the inventory being one of the biggest constraints in our market, in our ability to push up sales a little bit further. And if you look at the yellow line here, this represents the unsold inventory index for the entire Bay Area. And if you look at going back to January of 2012, this is really where our troubles started, and the inventory went from being in some sort of normal normal level to being way below normal. Now, if you look at the very far end of the orange line, you can see a little bit of pickup in this unsold inventory. However, if we look at the raw inventory numbers, the raw inventory actually only increased by 5% year to date. An unfortunate thing is that in the most affordable segment of the market, being that up to $1 million, the raw inventory is actually down 11%, and that has been consistently the case for the last few years. The large increase is in the inventory of $2 to $3 million, and again, that being in the Silicon Valley and San Francisco area. So the largest increase in inventory we've seen is in San Francisco, with 27% higher number of raw sales of raw listings this year than last year. But again, keep in mind that we're talking about a lot of new construction coming online, and Mark will talk about that in just a second. The second largest increase was in San Mateo with 20%. And again, keep in mind that we're talking about the more unaffordable part of the inventory, or that being above $2 million. The smallest increase in inventory, and actually decline in inventory, has been in North Bay Area, in Napa and Sonoma, where unlike was anticipated, the sales activity remained relatively stronger, with relatively stronger price appreciation than some other parts of the Bay Area. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Dean Worley, who is the Senior Vice President at John Burns Consulting. Dean?
Very much. I appreciate that. I thought I was going to trip over that after all the tequila I've had, so good thing I didn't. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It was beer. I'm going to take a kind of a regional look here at the Bay Area. We're going to go by MSAs. MSAs are Metropolitan Statistical Areas. So it's usually a aggregation of counties here in the Bay Area. A couple are just their own county. But let's start with a quick kind of a regional look, and you see jobs there on the top, right? What you see there is our projected job growth by these MSAs, and we'll see what constitutes these MSAs later on here in just a minute. But you see those 23,000, 23,600, year over year, those are year-over-year projected job growth for 2017, right? Percent-wise, in terms of rate of growth, those are roughly 1.5, 2.0, 2.2%. Solid, decent job growth rates for mature economies, but not spectacular. It compares to 2.5%, 3.5% in the past couple of years. Number-wise, it compares to something like 37 or so thousand, 35 currently, year-over-year, 45 to 50,000 a couple years ago in places like San Francisco and San Jose MSA. So job growth is clearly decelerating, and if we put 2018 up there, they'd be a little smaller still. San Francisco, let's start with San Francisco MSA. You can see again, it's Marin, San Mateo, and of course, most importantly, in this case, here are San Francisco counties. We've seen here, we all kind of know the story here in San Francisco. The rental market is slowing. Condo market is kind of slowing as well. Where we've seen a lot of slowing, though, is in that kind of luxury, the $2, $3 million and above in the condo market especially. You've seen that, and even in Marin and San Mateo, you've seen that part of the market slow. You still have kind of supply is pretty solid in terms of existing, but there really isn't any supply in this MSA coming online outside of the city. So in places like San Mateo and especially Marin, it's still that same story that it's been for years, which is just very, very undersupply. There's kind of a chronic undersupply in those areas, and we don't see that changing anytime soon. We do, by the way, see the pipeline starting to thin out a little bit in the next couple of years in San Francisco as well. The last thing I have there is what I call the real EP ratio. EP is employment over permit. Typically speaking, we think that about 1.25 jobs equals about 1 unit of demand, right? In places like the San Francisco MSA and the San Jose MSA we'll look at next, that's been more like 8 to 1, 9 to 1. I think 1 year San Francisco was 11 to 1. So that's just a huge, let's call it oversupply of jobs compared to the amount of housing that's coming online. In real life, though, in actuality, not all of those jobs produce incomes that can afford where all of that supply, that what little supply there is coming online, whether it's the rental market or the for sale market, can afford the price points. So what happens is that a place like San Francisco becomes a huge exporter of demand. It sends that demand that can't quite afford that San Francisco condo, but can afford that, you name it, that house in Dublin or that house on the Highway 4. So San Francisco will continue to be that, but as jobs start to thin down a little bit, we're going to see less of that we're going to see demand lessen a little bit, not just in San Francisco, but that export's going to get a little less too. So they will impact places like the East Bay and further out. San Jose, kind of the same story. The fundamentals are still strong-ish. I like the word, not great, not terrible. It's still pretty undersupplied. But my take on San Jose, especially in the new home sector, is that you can make a mistake now. Before, I can't, what's the dumb metaphor that you can fall out of a boat and hit water or something like that. And the San Jose, the Silicon Valley new home market was kind of like that. It's not that anymore. You can follow the boat and stay dry. I don't know how you do that. How would that happen? I don't know. But I shouldn't have gone down that metaphor path. But it is a market that we are seeing you can fail now. You can not pick the right product. You cannot do the right, that location isn't what you thought it was going to be. You can miss on price points, and you can fail now in San Jose. So that's something that's different than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. When we are here, we're seeing that demand push out to places, or at least because of affordability, it pushes us out to places like Gilroy and Hollister, and even into San Jose with supply demand in Dublin, Mountain House, Tracy, you name it. East Bay. Contra Costa and Alameda counties can constitute the East Bay. Its existing supply is kind of holding steady. There's actually been more new supply here. You've seen some things come online, like Wallace Ranch in the new home market, and actually added to the number of active new home projects in that area. So you've seen the competition to the resales kind of increase along those lines, counter to places like San Jose and San Francisco. But you have a market where the more affordable, where the meat of the market is there, is under $1 million, and that part of the market has actually kind of slowed a little bit. We've seen you still have some pretty good fundamentals in places like Lamarinda. We've seen the market kind of be pretty steady there. I think Selma's data, I hope, kind of supported that conclusion. But we've also seen some changes here, like Fremont. All the way up through Hayward, that southern Alameda County area, that's really become an extension of Silicon Valley. And we've seen a lot of demand there, and including coming over the bridge from the peninsula, because you have the same kind of dynamics going on where you have just really, really high prices, really good jobs in places like the Peninsula or Silicon Valley, and there's just a short, brutal commute into Fremont or Newark or someplace like that, and it is brutal. Or actually pretty quick, you hop over the bridge, it's not that bad at all. So you see places like Bay Shores by Lion in Newark has been very, very successful getting both Silicon Valley demand, but also one's a nurse and one's a radiologist at Stanford or something like that, go over the Dumbarton Bridge into a place like Newark. Napa, North Bay. We're going to do Napa, then Sonoma, and then I'll take it home with a couple more slides. Napa, it's kind of the same story. The volume, the existing volume has been pretty solid. Job growth has been pretty solid there, although here too, we expect localized job growth to slow down here. But there's just nothing new coming on in Napa. There just isn't it. Right now, I think there's maybe one townhome project in the city of Napa, and that's it. We have seen the $2 to $3 million in the resale market. That sector has been pretty strong, but it's not a huge part. Despite the image of Napa, it's not a giant part of that market. Most of the homes there are more bread and butter, middle to upper middle class kinds of homes. What I think we're going to see in Napa going forward, though, is going to be some more high density. We're going to see some townhomes. We're going to see some small lot detached. You have to get, again, because the income profile there is roughly middle class, you're going to have to find some product that is at affordable price points for those folks. I'm not talking about the big vineyard type properties and that stuff. But when we do see some more supply there, I think we'll see it at a little higher densities there. Santa Rosa MSA, that really is just Sonoma County. Same story there, just no new supply. There has been a little bit with Brookfield in University District in Roanoke Park, right by the university there, sensibly enough, given the name. And it's done very, very well. The builders there have been very successful. They've opened up very well. It's kind of the 800-pound gorilla of Sonoma County, and it's kind of the only thing out there right now. There's a couple other standalones. There'll be Riverfront by Comstock will be coming out of the market this coming up year. But like Napa, Sonoma is still pretty darn undersupplied. It still has a pretty good local economy. It's much more commutable down the 101 into places like here for jobs. So we're fairly sanguine on Santa Rosa. Now, let's go to, overall, in terms of overall, just to kind of recap what I just said, again, so the North Bay, we've had some pretty steady $2 to $3 million and above. Those really high-end properties, but they're not a huge part of either one of those markets, but they've held well. We haven't seen, though, that we've seen those same niches down to the south slow down in terms of their market capture, their market share, but we've seen that $1 to $2 million niche hold up pretty well. The economy is slowing, jobs are slowing down. That's going to have an effect not just in the core Bay Area where most of the jobs are located, but as I mentioned, that kind of ripple effect will affect the entire Bay Area region. It's going to affect the Central Valley and even Sacramento as well. San Francisco, and especially Silicon Valley and the city, are just big engines of demand. And so what happens here is going to have a major impact elsewhere. But we still see regionally, we still see a pretty low supply. So as the economy does slow down here, it's very possible that the housing market won't be as impacted as it otherwise would be because we haven't had that huge buildup in supply that we may have had in past lessons learned. So, I'm going to look back, then I'm going to look forward based on price. Looking back, over since 2000, this is the MSAs we just looked at, right? And this is the cumulative appreciation since 2000 for all of these MSAs. You can see, of course, San Francisco MSA and San Jose MSA, exactly what you expect, have kind of led the pack with huge, double. In San Francisco Place, more than double price points. What you'll see here, though, in terms of what we projected is kind of an overarching argument we made, is that, here, let's go to it. Over time, we've had the markets that have enjoyed the highest growth are likely to have the slower growth going forward, and places like Napa and Sonoma that have a little more calmer appreciation that we just saw back here. You see Napa and Sonoma off to the right there? We're projecting those two markets to have a little bit higher price appreciation going forward over the next 3 years. So you see the black there? That's kind of Halloween colors, isn't it? I like that. Looks like candy corn. I hate candy corn, so Terry, I blame you for that. We have pretty solid appreciation in 2017 in all of these markets. But look at the orange there, that's 2018, and then look or don't look if you're in San Francisco or the East Bay at the yellow. I think that's yellow. It's kind of a mustard. That's our 2019 projected appreciation in existing homes for that MSA. We see a couple of markets going negative. That's just the end of the cycle that John was talking about earlier. That's we have right. Markets always go. They swoop above and below that over that long-term trend line, and we're going to go below eventually. And it makes sense that that's going to happen as the job growth starts to slow down. I believe. Oh, I'm sorry. It was cumulatively. We have 11% over those 3 years in Napa, and so on through pretty minor growth cumulatively in the East Bay. Now, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Mark McLaughlin.
Thank you. I'm going to navigate us a little bit through the San Francisco new development condo market. But before I do it, I want to thank the Director of Research, Aaron Keneally, from the Mark Company for giving me the briefing to look really, really bright up here today, wherever Aaron is. Thank you. So I'm going to just talk about three different dynamics in the new condo development, city and county of San Francisco. Currently selling in the city of San Francisco, there are just a little over 1,000 units, about 1,050 units. Under construction, there are 950 units, okay, of condos. Apartments under construction, nearly 3,000. Okay, and to be determined, meaning projects that might be in infrastructure, and when they come out of the ground, is another 1,700 units that could go condo or apartments. It's an interesting dynamic because we're such a supply-constrained environment in really the whole Bay Area, but in the city of San Francisco, these are some nice numbers coming forward. Projects that are approved that are not under construction, again, the greatest wild card in the whole thing is there are 30,000 units, okay, that have been approved but are not in the process of being under construction yet. So supply on its way to be determined whether it's going to be multifamily housing or new condo units. Okay, this is about a 2-year look at the actual dynamics between pricing, supply, and demand. So across the top, there's a yellow line. That's your pricing line. You can see it peaks in just about August of 2015, and you can see it starting to tail off since the top of 2016. The dark lines across the bottom are monthly units of sales of new construction condominiums. It averages about 800 units a month, okay, if you go back over time. There are a couple months where it's, 800 units a year. I'm sorry, there are a couple of months where there have been sales of over 200 units, but relatively unusual. And the orange bars are the new construction inventory. So we have about a year, plus or minus, of supply of new condos. So let's take that sort of metric or that snapshot in time and look forward to 2019. This time, the yellow line, okay, is inventory at the beginning of the year. How many units are in inventory that can be delivered in 2016, 17, 18, and 19? Okay, the orange line is those that are entering the market, okay, and the dark gray lines is the actual absorption. So you can see that it's a relatively healthy and balanced market. We're not oversupplied, about a year's worth of inventory, but if more projects don't begin coming out of the ground, the inventory beginning in 2017, going to 2019, is going to begin to fall below existing demand. So in my call this morning with Chris and Aaron, I got a serious education on the pretty fine balance right now of the new condominium market in the city and county of San Francisco. Interesting phenomena, and very different than the resale housing market that we just got a snapshot from Dean on. Okay, so as we look out to 2019, the one thing that we haven't talked about, although John and Dean and Selma and I have spent a bunch of time on it, is interest rates. Okay, what will interest rates do, especially in the events that we experienced last week? I think everybody going into Tuesday expected one result, and we obviously got another. So what's the dynamic going to be? On a national basis, if you have a $500,000 mortgage, there's an orange line here, and if you've got $1 million mortgage, there's a green line here. And as interest rates increase, you can see the percentage of the population that can actually afford that mortgage. So if it's a $500,000 mortgage, we're starting out nationally that 50% of the population that's in the market can afford that home or that mortgage. As interest rates go to 8%, that falls down to 20 million. Or excuse me, these are millions of buyers. That falls down to 20, meaning if you're a builder or if you're selling your home, the market's moving away from you as interest rates go up. In the $1 million mortgage, it starts at about 18 million and winds its way down to about 5. Okay, so what does that mean? In the Bay Area, we don't have too many $500,000 mortgages. So we thought we'd put together a little dynamic for you that if you're out to buy a home for about $1,250,000 and you want to put $1 million mortgage on it, right now in the Bay Area, about 25% of our population can afford that mortgage. Okay, you take interest rates to 5% or raise them 100 basis points, that drops from 25 to 20%. Okay, your buying pool is getting smaller. Take that same mortgage to 6%, and now 15%, almost 16% of the population can afford that home. As a seller, that's a very different dynamic if I lost 10% of the population or almost 30% of the available pool of buyers. Let's look at it a different way. Let's say we wanted to keep the pool of buyers constant at 25%, but interest rates ticked up. At 5%, now instead of buying a house for $1,250,000 with $1 million mortgage, you're buying plus or minus a $1.1 million home with an $890,000 mortgage. It goes up 100 more basis points, the value of the mortgage falls down to below $800,000, and now you're buying a $1 million home. So things to think about going from now in 2019 is what are the interest rates going to do? Is the squeeze on? Okay, and we're going to test John, I think, with that question in Q&A. So somebody come to the mic and ask that. So that's our snapshot. The variable that we really don't know right now is what's going to happen with interest rates going forward. And at this point, we'd love to open it up with questions. I'll have John and Dean and Selma come join me here on stage. And if you have a question, please come down to one of the mics, and I would be happy to try and answer for you.
Hi, good evening. I'm just wondering how the Trump election is going to be affecting the Bay Area real estate market.
That didn't take long.
Let's pick on the
not allowed to
I'm not
answer
answering.
that.
Let's
John
pick
has
on the new
forbidden me.
kid.
No, I'm his boss. You're not allowed to answer that.
He's like,
Take this one.
Selma?
Yeah, Selma.
Yes. My mic is not working.
Sure it is.
Go.
It's very hard to tell, and I think what's really hard to tell is there is a really big disconnect in what was talked about versus what is actually going to be implemented in terms of policies. Now, what we do know, and for the housing market, we do anticipate the mortgage rates to go up, and mortgage rates are going to put the squeeze on the affordability in the Bay Area. So that's sort of certain, but are the mortgage rates going to go up and how much? I mean, the anticipation is that they are, but how much are going to go up and how fast, that we don't know. I think I'll leave it at that.
I'll add one thing. So really for the first time ever, the President of the United States controls the entire mortgage market because they appoint the head of FHFA, which used to not exist, to oversee Fannie and Freddie. They set all the Fannie and Freddie policies. They appoint the head of HUD, which oversees FHAs, and then now we have the CFPB, and they appoint the director of the CFPB, which is the person who controls all the documentation. Then all the rules get made by the bureaucrats that then get appointed. So what I'm going to be spending a lot of time on is finding out who those appointees are and where their head's going to be, because I think that's going to make a big difference on our business.
I'm not allowed to answer.
I'm not touching it. Greg?
Rent control. We know a number of the cities are considering rent control, specifically in the Silicon Valley and a number of the other Bay Area cities. We know our population is growing, albeit at a pretty small percentage. What is your feeling on the impact of rent control within our oncoming market?
And be forewarned, Craig is very active in the Santa Rosa market where rent control is topical.
Yeah, I know so little about it to answer it would be a little bit dangerous. I mean, we focus on the market, not the government-controlled market. Yeah. I mean, most of the white papers I've read is that rent control really doesn't work very well, but that's such a political hot potato, I'm not really qualified to answer that. I'm sorry.
Selma?
Yeah. Well, when economists talk about rent control, they usually talk about it as a negative because it puts such a constraint on the market, right? Now, why are we talking about rent control? Because the lack of affordability. Now, what new administration can do to help is there can be some sort of federal subsidies. I don't want to call them subsidies, but some sort of federal funds to help focus new construction around transit corridors, so transit-oriented development and higher densities. So that's the way in which the new administration can help with providing more affordable housing that's not rent control housing.
I'll add one thing, just kind of an aside to that, the income growth in the Bay Area, because housing is so affordable, has far outstripped the rest of the country. In fact, when we did these stats we're working with Mark on some of those stats, I was amazed that the percentages of people that could afford $1 million mortgage were that high in the Bay Area. Was it like
25%?
Yeah, and the number of 17% of households make $200,000 or more, I think it was. That is almost double, or maybe even more than that, the average in the country. So I think that's what we've created here, is income growth, and that has been good for this business.
Jim?
John, you were talking about the sharer demographic group. My daughter is is a sharer. In fact, all three.
Born in the 1980s.
Yeah. They're into renting. They're into renting cars for a short period of time. They're into renting clothes. I mean, they are just.
No, he laughs. They rent their prom dress. I mean, she's totally right. Good idea. Yeah.
That group I'm really curious about what your views are as to them being future home buyers and when you think that will happen.
So that was part of the reason we spent 9,000 hours doing this book, is just the more research we did, the more research we needed to do. So here's where I came down on that. So I believe that they do want to own. They're more cautious. In fact, some of them that have already moved into home ownership are not maxing out. They're saying things like, I don't want to give up my vacation and some other things, so I will buy a little bit less than I can afford. But we think there's going to be 12.5 million households added over the next 10 years is our best guess. 7 million rentals and 5 million owned. And so you hit the nail on the head. They want to own, but when push comes to shove, a mortgage kind of holds me back. And also, the income growth that they've seen during the first 10 to 15 years of their economic growth has been abysmal. It's actually been closer to the growth that the people born in the 1930s experienced in the 1920s, going through than any decade since. So you can't just blame them for that. And then they've invented the sharing economy. You're right on. That is about renting. That's about borrowing stuff, and they're totally cool with that. And the fact that people don't care whether their neighbor as much anymore as a homeowner or a renter. It's just my neighbor. And then there's been some tax code things now too that have changed things. That less of a discussion here, but more of a national discussion. The standard deduction for a couple is $12,600. The typical mortgage in the country is $200,000, so 4% interest on that is $8,000. People aren't even getting a tax deduction in most of the country anymore for being homeowners. So just that impetus to own, I think, has been diminished. But I still think they'll get to 52% home ownership by the age of 38, so I'm not killing home ownership.
John, the suburban dynamic that you described, is that specific to one group of demographics?
I think all of society has said, I'd rather spend less time on the road all the way across society, and I think cities have adopted this, which I think has helped. Here in the Bay Area, it's more the older buyer demographic because it is so expensive. But you are seeing, and what has happened about this group is they're more college educated than ever before. Actually, 58% of college degrees are going to women, so she's more likely to be the breadwinner than him. And we're getting married and having a child at the age of 33, so guess what? We both have 10 years of work experience and we're making good bucks, and this is our first home, so we can't afford something that costs $800,000 or $1 million because together we qualify for that.
Yeah.
So
And
I
when
think
it's a
that's
younger
been a big
demographic,
shift.
it's they're going for affordability. We've seen there's a development in the Sacramento kind of mid-county area that is very tiny, very high density, but it's suburban. It's truly suburban, and it's getting a very young demographic. So and it's been tremendously successful with its location. Like John said, they will settle for lesser product for the right location.
For lesser square footage.
Lesser square footage, yeah, even just bare bones.
So I have a millennial that I evicted for failure to pay rent after about 14 months in my house. And was he hanging around the hoop waiting for that truck of cash to show up, or what's going on there?
He's waiting for that little truck.
Yeah, exactly. So if that truck
Is he a
moves along,
90s kid or an 80s kid?
he's a 93.
Yeah, so this is where that millennial discussion totally breaks down. So your child went through a different economy than yours. So someone born in 93 actually has entered the workforce. The economy has been fine his entire career. But they saw what they happened, and they're very risk averse, I think. And they're clearly getting married later. They're clearly going to have kids later.
But if that truck backs up, they're likely to buy a house.
Well, you can get into parenting issues, but I don't want to go there. So. I've got some of those too, so that's why I don't want to go there.
Adam, you had a question.
Were you booted out your 23-year-old? I'm doing the math. in my head.
14 months of no rent?
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I was reading the SFK this afternoon, and someone was quoted in it, and it specifically addresses Chinese foreign nationals and the effect of the Trump election. And being in Palo Alto, will that affect the number of Chinese foreign nationals that are investing in both Palo Alto and the greater Bay Area?
I have an opinion that I can't say.
What did you say?
I have an opinion that I can't express.
I thought you said something in Mandarin.
I may have.
Mark, I didn't understand it either.
So California's economic growth and population growth is highly dependent on immigration from Asia. Not anymore from south of the border, actually. It's net, contrary to the rhetoric, it's been net zero. There's as many people coming across as coming back. That wall has already been built. And domestically, people are leaving California every single day. And that international immigration here is critical. And so what actually happens there, I think, is going to be important. But we really don't know. We're guessing at this point.
Do you mean policy-wise, or do you mean more psychologically?
Combination of the two.
Okay.
If we have a hostile environment for immigrants.
So we were asked this question by a reporter, Terry, earlier this week, and coincidentally, Jennifer Davis and Kathy Lee are in Guangzhou and Shanghai, I think, this week, and connected with Rupert. I don't know if any of you remember Rupert, who was on stage with us a few years ago. But the quote that came back, and Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, was the motivation to exit capital from mainland China, education, and if you've never been to Beijing, clean air, has probably enough energy to surpass Trump.
Yeah. No, I've heard that too. They're coming here because they want out more than they want
what we've got.
Yeah.
Right. Dana.
I wish I had a crystal ball on interest rates. Most of my clients are choosing 30-year jumbo mortgages, and I'm wondering when you're anticipating a 50 to 100 basis point increase in those mortgages.
Okay, so we just looked that up. There's something on the Bloomberg terminal about bond futures for 10-year treasuries, and the people that are making bets on interest rates are betting rates are going to go up 110 basis points between now and 2020. But as I look at that, it's like, look, if you're buying a house, lock it. If it goes down, refinance it. And if it goes up, just be glad you locked it.
Good advice. Thank you.
Okay.
Bill, or yeah, go ahead.
All the stats I saw with increasing mortgage rates, decreasing borrower pool, wanted to ask your opinion on marketplace lending, especially in the Bay Area, how that affects the buyer pool with lower down payments, low fees, that kind of thing. Non-QM.
You mean like what SoFi and Lending Home and those guys are doing? Yeah, so the bank regulators have come down really hard on the banks to the point where a bank will only make a loan and keep it on its books if it's pristine. I mean, a really high credit, really low LTV type. And then actually just last week, I was with the CFO of Chase Mortgage, and he said we learned during this downturn that to go low down to the 640 FICO and those sort of, that we just don't get paid well enough to do that, even if we're charging the LLPAs and all the other things. We just, the risk there is just way too much for us, so we're not going there. So there's a void in the market of people that will make loans that are not pristine, that is, I'm worried about, that is going to be a non-regulated or not as regulated group that's going to come in and take more risk. So I'm keeping a close eye on it. The volumes are pretty low right now, though. They're actually extremely low. So I'm not concerned at all. But I think if the next subprime is going to emerge, it's going to emerge from something like that. But I really think the laws in Dodd-Frank were so darn strong, we're not going to see that again. Yeah. Low.
You were talking about volume, I think.
Oh, I mean, as a percentage of the mortgage market in the country, it's well less than 1%. For those marketplace type, I mean, the bulk of the loans are still being made by, I know the big banks make 30% of the loans, and there's another, I think, 50% that are made by Quicken and those Intuit and those type of mortgage outfits that are taking a lot of market share. So these marketplace guys, I don't know. I should probably stop because I don't know the numbers, but they're a bigger percentage of the market here, but nationally they're not a big percentage at all. Okay. Okay, that's
From
not,
SoFi?
yeah, that's nothing. So that's $140 million. That's $140 million mortgages.
SoFi has a very high profile here.
Yeah.
We know them pretty well. But I think as you get away from the headquarters, are you with SoFi? Yeah.
I could have guessed that. I did that once.
Some reason I was figuring that out. Yeah. No, it's a great product. I mean, I know that Patrick Barber, the president of Pacific Union, has used it. It's a great product. What? And Selma's using it.
Yeah.
Hey. There's 2 endorsements. Bill? Bill, do you have a question?
I was interested in a couple of stats, one of which is that inventory is low. That's one of the drivers. And the other is the boomers are not moving. And they tied up huge amounts of equity in their properties. There's empty nesters living in 5-bedroom homes, and they're not moving. And there's a thought that by fixing Prop 60, Prop 60 is if you're over 55, you can go tax basis carry forward to your next property. You can use it once. It has to be same or equal value, et cetera. But if you modified that, maybe took away the age restriction, maybe took away the one-time use, maybe it doesn't have to be equal or lesser value, and allow tax basis carry forward more liquid, more fluid. I'm wondering if there's any stats as to whether or thought about whether or not that would significantly impact available inventory.
I think I can almost certainly
so,
would.
yeah. I think so too. I think that's the biggest impediment to boomers selling right now is that tax challenge. And so if we allow people to move their tax base across the California or maybe even elsewhere, but hopefully keep them in California, that would open up inventory a lot.
We hear it all the time in sales offices where that's definitely an impediment to demand. Politically, though, in California, to get what you're talking about, Pat, I think is unlikely.
Yeah,
I think it's happening more and more, though. I mean, I think more counties are coming on board. I think right now, I don't know how many counties, maybe you probably know better, how many counties we have participating in the program, but I think it's opening up. I think more expensive counties are realizing the importance of opening to that.
Right. Prop 60 is within the same county. Prop 90 is county to county, and
Yes,
there's
I'm
only
thinking Prop 90,
6 or 7
yes.
counties in the whole state that are with that right now. So, yes, that's a severe limitation on the program.
Yeah.
I'll just add 2 stats we've learned. So we did a huge survey of who was out shopping. They're an overrepresented population of people that are out looking for homes. But they said they're not finding what they're looking for. So we're trying to figure out what that is. But they're saying, well, I'm not moving because I'm not finding what I'm looking for. And then also we have a remodeling side of our business. The remodeling business is doing great. So maybe there's more remodeling going on because they're not finding what they're looking for. I'm sure the policies would help as well.
Last question.
The models that you presented contemplated an expanding economy, yet we are beyond what is the historical norm for a post-war expansion. What do you feel are the probabilities that in the next 2 years we will have a contraction in the economy as opposed to the expansion that you've suggested?
Clearly that's something I lose sleep about is being wrong there. So although this expansion has been much longer than normal, it's been a lot slower than normal. So usually recessions are caused, in fact, 11 of the last 12 recessions were caused by several industries growing too fast and then having to pull back. So what I've been looking at is which industries have grown too fast. So oil grew way too fast and pulled back. Tech, I think, has grown way too fast and is at the beginning of a pullback. Controversially, and this has nothing to do with Obamacare, I was saying this 2 months ago, the healthcare industries, particularly the hospitals, I think have grown way too fast and need to pull back. So that's what I'm concerned about. But I go through all the other sectors of the economy and you kind of look at nothing else seems to be really going so fast that everybody needs to pull back and stop hiring or laying people off. And actually all the economists I talk to, I'm kind of a bear there. Most of them are even more bullish than me that the economy is going to keep growing.
We'd have to run the numbers, but I wonder if we have, say, a 9-year cycle, cumulatively, though, the economic growth might be very similar to a 4 or 5 year normal cycle.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So that's why that argues for, because it has been a slow slog, kind of a slow and go recovery.
Why don't you repeat that? Make sure everybody got that.
The idea is that we're in this slow and go recovery. It's not as sharp and as dramatic as a lot of other recoveries historically. So maybe what we'll have is a similar overall cumulative growth over whatever it winds up being 8, 9, 10 years that happens in the typical 4 or 5 year recovery period in the past.
And the other thing related to this is the banks have been so tight that businesses haven't been able to borrow and grow way too fast. So I think that's helping the economy with this slow growth. But clearly, I could be wrong. And if you've got some insight, I'd love to hear it afterwards.
Did you have a follow-on?
That sounds like you're very, very confident then that we're not going to have a setback.
Well,
He's trying to get you on the record.
Are you looking for a promise?
It sounds like it. It sounds like he wants.
What I lose sleep about is what I don't know.
Yeah.
So if you know something that's going to cause it, and clearly government policy, like the economist I was with this morning said, if we put big trade tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico, he goes, we'll have a recession within 6 months. So, I mean, there's a lot of things we can do to cause one, but I'm not just going to stand up here and say we're going to do that. So right now, that's the best case scenario I've got.
We've all seen Mad Max, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want to try and wrap this up for you, and most of you are probably thinking to yourself, when I get back to my voicemail or my email and my clients tomorrow, whether they're a buyer or a seller, what do we tell them? And I think John and Dean and Selma have all shared that we've got some growth left. It's decelerating. And then there's a question in 2019. So we have done some research at Pacific Union, and we've targeted, who are the buyers, what are they looking for? And so the thing that the buyers need to think about, number one, the predominance of buyers that we have right now, in our rearview mirror, were Gen X and boomers, okay? The reason that they moved was to change location. For some reason in their lives, they were changing location, whether it would be the suburban or whatever the dynamic might be. They're calculating an arbitrage between the job center and the cost of the home. Okay, so some of the areas that were really hot that someone talked about were away from city center. Some people wanted the choice to be in city center. And everybody, I think, is going to be dealing with, whether it be real or perceived, the interest rate dynamic. Sellers, on the other hand, the research that we've done with, our trailing 12 Pacific Union trades, is the sellers are boomers and Gen X. All right? And the reason they're moving is change in family status. And you can't usually slow that down. That's either birth, that's somebody going to kindergarten, that's somebody graduating from college, that's marriage, it's the alternative, things like that. And so the local buyers, coming to your community, what kind of housing demand are they looking for? If they're a boomer or a Gen X, they're looking for something different than the sharers, right? They're looking for something different than the millennials. So as a seller, you got to figure out, what product am I selling? Right? And you got to be really specific about it. Alan Mark told me one day, months ago, that if you don't get the product right, it doesn't matter how good your marketing is, and it doesn't matter what your pricing strategy is, because the product's wrong. Okay? And then the sellers are that interest rate dynamic of the market moving away from you. When's the right time to sell? Lots of things going on. To take the Bill's question, the two things we hear all the time in the market for why people aren't moving, one is taxes, and two is, where do I go? I can't find the house that I want. So I hope today was helpful. I want to thank Dean and Selma, and especially John, for doing this with us again. Thank you very much today.